Edward Winslow is a very interesting man. He was the second in command in Plymouth, and he's the one who takes it upon himself to become the principal emissary to Massasoit. Some Indians had a dual chiefdom system. That is, they had an overall chief who is called the inside chief, who is responsible for the community and basically stays within the community. And then there's an outside chief who is responsible for essentially foreign relations and war. Winslow is acting as the outside chief.
Please, Heavenly Father, watch over your child, Massasoit. Imbue him with your strength of spirit. Restore him to health.
Winslow's medicine was of no particular benefit to Massasoit. But the chief did recover, and Winslow was there, representing the entire Plymouth colony, when Massasoit was able to rise again. In spite of a growing trust between Edward Winslow and Massasoit, the relationship between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag remained tentative. The Pilgrims were separatists, devout Christians who had fled the Old World, for fear its corruptions would darken the godly light in which they dwelled. Corrupting influences lurked everywhere.
She cannot meant to eat this.
Even Winslow, who found the Wampanoag and other tribes trustworthy, quick of apprehension, and just, fretted about close contact with Indians.
You see at the beginning of the 17th century, this kind of cautious getting to know one another. As those peoples become more and more dependent on one another and exchange more and more goods and ideas, and people, children, wives, families have more and more contact with one another. In a sense, the two peoples come to share a great deal. The English come to be more like Indians in many ways. They dress more like Indians, they use Indian words, they're familiar with Indian ways, and the Indians come to be more like English. A lot of Indians speak English. They wear English clothes, they build houses that are English. There's a reciprocity of exchange that actually turns out, we might think, oh, how lovely, you know, what a nice multicultural fest that is. But actually, it makes everyone very, very nervous.
The Pilgrims were especially wary. They were badly outnumbered, and many Indians, they believed, bore the English an inveterate malice. They also knew Massasoit hadn't the power to shield them from every danger. So in the spring of 1623, after hearing rumors of a planned attack by Massachusetts Indians to the north, the Pilgrims, under their militia leader Miles Standish, made a deadly preemptive raid and returned to Plymouth with an object lesson to those who would cross them.
Gentlemen, here's a proper trophy.
This sudden and unexpected execution has so terrified the Indians, Edward Winslow wrote, that many have fled their homes. Living like this on the run, many have fallen sick and died. Shocking and brutal as the raid was, Massasoit counseled his sachems to keep up relations with Plymouth. The Wampanoag were still the favored friends of the English, and the English were surely no threat to their friends.
Massasoit is able to keep this peace for a long time, which suggests that it's not simply his personality and his command that's doing that. The nature of Native society means that he is representing what the majority of his people want to do.
The Indians wanted certain things from the Europeans: knives, axes, swords, and steel drills.
Europeans bring things like metal kettles that are very useful for Indian people, and Indian people incorporate those goods into their own cultures on their own terms and in their own ways.
For Native people, trade is about binding people together in relationships of reciprocity. So that was the question. How do we bring the English into these relationships of reciprocity?
Chiki wampum? Paimito. Peosh.
We lived right near the shoreline, and we harvested the quahogs, which you make the quahog chowder from, and all the other good things. And then after you eat the contents, then you save the shell. We wasted nothing the Creator gave because everything was a gift. And from the shell, from the quahog, the purple spot is what we made the wampum beads from. All the tribes respected the wampum, and the value that wampum had was spiritual more so than material. We used it in ceremony. It sealed agreements. It was what notarized the transaction. When wampum was exchanged, no one would break the agreement that went along with a wampum, a marriage agreement or a treaty or whatever, because it was so sacred, and you don't go against the Creator.
Initially, the Europeans then will say, well, this must be like silver or gold. This is something that Indian people will use and trade back and forth, so they accept it initially as well. And wampum is seen as Native American currency by the English.
European traders, long familiar with a money economy, set in motion a system for exchanging hard goods for wampum, making the Indians' traditional ceremonial amulet the coin of the American realm. Trade flourished under this ingenious new system. English merchants eagerly awaited Indian furs from the New World. The beaver hat was the fashionable new accessory on the streets of London, and the arrival at Plymouth of product-laden ships from England was happy news to all. With the import of steel drills, native tribes could greatly speed the manufacture of wampum.
It's much easier to create a wampum shell, to drill that hole through the center with a steel drill than with a stone drill. And so suddenly there's a large supply of wampum. And what this means is that tribes in the interior who previously had very little access to wampum now are able to get it. And there are also groups that have furs and other things to trade to the Europeans.
Plymouth colonists rely on Massasoit to begin brokering connections with other native groups. So Massasoit becomes this very important node in these regional exchanges among furs and European goods and wampum, all of which are being exchanged many times in different groups, depending on who has what.
With the Pilgrims integrated into the web of his alliances, Massasoit's gamble, welcoming the strangers, seemed to have paid handsome dividends.
I think he would have looked back over the previous decade and thought that he had done some pretty good work. It must have seemed possible to Wampanoags and to other native groups in southern New England to envision a future in which English and native communities could live profitably together.
In the spring of 1630, a fleet of ships led by the Arabella appeared off the coast to the north of Plymouth, carrying 1,000 new immigrants. While the Pilgrims had been escaping Europe, these Puritans meant to recreate a new and more pious England in America. They had embarked from England with a grant from their king to establish the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and with a boundless sense of mission.
In Europe at this time, and particularly among the Christian kingdoms of Europe, there was this belief in the right to go out and usurp land that was not occupied by Christian people. And there's a religious basis for this, as well as political, in that this was a God-ordained practice in which one would be spreading Christianity and would be spreading European civilization, and there was a moral obligation